Thank you guys so much for joining us. And I am Ashley Medeiros, and I am actually very new to Venture Cafe. I am the new head of strategy and impact. And so this is my first time leading a conversation in my new role. But prior to coming and joining Venture Cafe, I actually had the opportunity to work with Bob and Peter in my last position. And so when I heard about transportation, what they had done to support workforce development and bring employees to Warren was just popped into my head, and I reached out and we decided to bring this to you because I think it's such a great story and something that a lot of people can learn from. And so I will let Bob and Peter introduce themselves, but let's start with Bob Rulli, who is the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town of Warren.
Thanks, Ashley. Yes, I've had the privilege of working with Ashley for almost the last 3 years now. She was too proud to say, or unproud to say, she's a resident of Warren as well. Route 60 RIPTA bus is one of the more heavily utilized buses in the systems in the RIPTA system. It runs from Providence to Newport right through Warren on our Main Street, Route 114. We have another state highway, Route 136, that also runs north to south from the Mass border to Newport, that has very limited RIPTA service and doesn't have RIPTA service along the entire route. So early on in this conversation, I was actually at another manufacturer, Taylor Box, and talking with Dan Shedd that owned it, and talking about difficulties with workforce. And Dan pointed out that he was, if one person got a job someplace else, that disrupted the entire carpool, and particularly if that person was driving the carpool. A large portion of his workforce was coming from outside of the area, which got me to think that, right, there's no public transportation that's easily accessible from anybody coming from the Providence area. Had a similar conversation with Peter King from Water Rower, whose manufacturing facility and offices are on Metacom. There is one RIPTA bus that kind of loops onto Metacom, but it misses the northern section. And many of, and Peter will speak more about it, but many of his employees also carpool. And so it got us, thinking about, well, why doesn't RIPTA have a bus system that, runs the entire length? Through this process, Dan was teaching a class at the Highlander Charter School, which is also in Warren. And we learned there that 95% of the students that go to that school come from outside the area. Some as far away as Warwick, but many from Providence, Pawtucket Falls. And they rely on parents or carpools to get to school on a daily basis, which makes it difficult for any after-school activities. So with all that, we reached out to RIPTA and initiated the conversation about having bus service. And RIPTA was actually very helpful. They prepared a survey for us to get to manufacturers in the school. They did it in multiple languages. Surprisingly, the feedback was that most people preferred to carpool or drive themselves to work. And I think that that's a function of not trusting the transportation system. If it's not reliable, then people are not going to take the chance that they're going to miss work or be late for work. But the other piece that was of interest to me, and it still is that just reducing the amount of vehicular traffic on that road. It's a major commuting route for people that are going to Aquidneck Island. Really see the impacts of the lack of public transportation now. If you're familiar with our area in Bristol, the Silver Creek Bridge is under construction. So if you're traveling south and north, you cannot go through the center of Bristol. And it's pushing all that traffic to Metacom to the point where from the Bristol line back to the Mount Hope Bridge on a daily basis, at the end of the day, it's bumper to bumper. So last piece before I let Peter jump in is that we're looking to revitalize that Metacom Avenue corridor. It represents really the very best of 1950s, early 60s planning and architecture. It's a lot of one-story buildings with parking in the front and the building at the back of the lot. And we're looking really at concentrating on transit-oriented development, looking to have the size of the road reduced, creating mixed income housing opportunities, but also with a priority on having improved public transportation available to people that would be relocating to that area. So that's how the conversation with RIPTA started. I'll say that we got a bus. They run one bus in the morning and one bus in the afternoon, not necessarily solving the problem. The bus does start at Kennedy Plaza, but for some odd reason, it ends at a park and ride on Fish Road in Tiverton. I'm very curious on who is taking a bus at 6 o'clock in the morning to a park and ride in Tiverton. It has to be investigated because it makes no sense. I really was hoping that RIPTA would somehow loop that bus to go right into Newport, because I think it would encourage people that are looking to go to Aquidneck Island to take public transportation, because I live on Aquidneck Island. I come at reverse commute to Warren on a daily basis, and traffic isn't that bad now because of people working remotely, but it's not easy to get onto Aquidneck Island off the island at rush hour. So I will yield for a moment and kick it back to Ashley.
Well, thank you. That is a good overview of some of the challenges, I think, when we have businesses, and we have a ton of businesses throughout the East Bay, the Bristol and Newport County, and it's something we all face. But I kind of want to hear from Peter in the perspective of a manufacturer whose facility is in the East Bay. But I also want Peter to talk just a little bit. We are Venture Cafe, and I would say Peter is the epitome of a entrepreneur and a innovator. And so Peter, before we get started really in transportation, can you just tell us a little bit about your business and why you chose Rhode Island and how you built it right here in Warren?
Yeah, choose. It's funny that I'm not too sure. It's part of the thing with entrepreneurship. Sometimes you don't choose. You just go with what's there. So yeah, the original inventor of the water rower is a New Yorker, married a Rhode Island girl and settled here. And I guess he started developing in cheap mill space up in Cottage Street in Pawtucket and played around there. Sometime later, he found even cheaper mill space in Warren. Is really the roots of why we're based in Warren, is because he found that cheap mill space, which is, as I've spoken at the town level before and other levels is talking about, that's a huge asset that the town's got, is this incubator space. And you've seen it all over the state, that this mill space has been used in such a way, get people off the ground. We're one of those people. We came in, with just 2 or 3 employees. I think I had 4 employees. Actually, when I bought the John's business here, let me step back. I'd licensed it for Europe. I was living in London at the time, and originally from Sydney. So I know both Sydney and London got fantastic public transport systems. So one of the reasons that I kind of got behind these guys' efforts to open up a route out to coming out here, that there just didn't exist one. And if I have guests and visitors arrive and they want to take a bus, you say, sorry, there aren't any. Certainly to the more, there are maybe running through town on the set schedule, but if you want to get further afield, and we're right on the Massachusetts line, so that makes it difficult as well, because you don't have these transit lines running across the state lines as easily or readily. So, but yeah, we're running stuff in London. I bought the US business, and we had 1.5 employees when I bought it back in 1998. And we're in an old mill building up the road here, and that's in short what brought us to Warren. But we stayed here and grown, and we see the importance of businesses like ours and growing businesses like ours to the local economies, and it's quite humbling in a way that how important it is. We're now at 225, I think, employees here. Warren itself, I think Bob will be touching out. We've just handed over the keys to TPI's new development a couple of days ago, and Jade Manufacturing moving in, and we've got quite a good core of manufacturing businesses here in Warren with a population of 10,000. I think there's over 1,000 employees in manufacturing, so it is quite a big element of the town. But being in manufacturing, you have those, you have shift work, you have early morning starts. For anywhere from 5 o'clock in the morning, people are drifting in here. but the core of the people are coming in 7 to 3:30. And while we have buses running in, we have a bus route, a very busy bus route running through the East Bay. It was always, and it's a problem with these provincial areas, most of that public transport is running inbound, is running into Kennedy Plaza to get the office workers into their offices. And nothing was running outbound. So our guys didn't have, and they're in the demographic that need that, let's face it. You know, this $15 wage in around that area at the lower end of the income level. And they need it. And because a car to them is, if you see some of the excuses for cars in the car park here are kind of quite hard to come by and hard to maintain when you're on that sort of income. So, you know, we were very fortunate in being able to, and as Bob said, RIPTA was very cooperative in trying to get a bus route out here. And it was really easy as putting 1 and 1 to 2 is they had a bus who was running back out this way and over the Tiverton Bridge, running back to the Newport Depot in the morning around about this time. So the epiphany came that they just said, well, let's repurpose it and run it out carrying passengers and alter the route so that came down 195 and down 136, past a couple of the different plants, Highlander School, as Bob said, down adjacent to Child Street where Taylor Box is, past the mill, the Parker Mill there, and up Metacom where we are, and down towards the Broad Common Industrial Park of Bristol. So it worked pretty well, you know. And
thank you, Peter. I know the biggest thing is, and Peter not only owns Water Grower, but he also owns Parker Mill, as well as the TPI building. And so a lot of properties that are really supporting our small businesses, entrepreneurship, and growing the economy throughout the East Bay. And so we see such a barrier when you can't get your employees in. And it's such a good point that when somebody's making $15 an hour, you know, it's just so hard. It's almost impossible to live here and work here. And so we have to make sure that we're using transportation strategically and wisely. And it's been a bit of a challenge. And the other thing that we had mentioned that was brought into this collaboration and this partnership was also Highlander Charter School. And I know Bob knows a little bit more about Highlander, but they were spending a considerable amount of money on private buses from Providence, where a lot of their students were coming from. And so we thought if we could all work together, it would save the school a considerable amount of money. It would benefit the business, the town, as well as the students. And so I'll let Bob talk a little bit about how that all kind of came into play and the benefits of working together.
Yeah, the school was, I think, budgeting almost $2 million a year for private transportation to get students. You know, again, some are coming from Warwick in the West Bay, some were coming from Pawtucket, and they couldn't even get them all to Kennedy Center Square so to get on a bus. So just the savings alone, not every student is being captured on that early morning bus, unfortunately, because it comes, I think, about 45 minutes to an hour before school actually starts. But just the realization that they were spending that much money on transportation, particularly in this environment, and this was pre-COVID, was pretty staggering. But any of you that RIPTA is its own entity, you know, we struggle with, you know, how do we, and not advocating that Rhode Island Department of Transportation should take over RIPTA has been suggested, but, you know, how do we kind of integrate enhanced public transportation on state roads? And, you know, the corridor we're talking about is really, you know, I think it lends itself very well to reliable public transportation, as Peter said. And, you know, there's a great deal of manufacturing. Not every job in those manufacturing facilities is a white collar job. As the people that are carpooling, some of them, you know, it was interesting. When we had our first meeting with RIPTA, they said, well, you know, we have a program where they can van pool, and the employees, one of them can sign up for the van, they can use that, take that home, and they just have to fill out some forms. They're like, no, they're not filling out any forms. They don't want to fill out forms. I mean, it might be their immigration status or whatever. So, you know, the bus was really the only alternative. But so we made the progress to have the bus running, but we haven't crossed the threshold of improving the service. I mean, RIPTA knows the ridership is down, but it's also a function of how the route is set up too. But I'm hoping that as we start to advance our redevelopment in this corridor, which we're going to increase the density that's going to be allowed, and really start integrating DOT into the conversation as well, that we'll see the frequency of buses increase, and that we can demonstrate that the ridership will be there. Again, we've got areas of town that are susceptible to flooding. A lot of these people are is low, moderate income, that where they are now, they have access to public transportation. If we were to relocate them to Metacom, we need to make sure we can still give them access to public transportation. So I always, when I compare Rhode Island in the conversations with public transportation to when I worked in DC or in New York City, I always say, Rhode Island, we don't even have a carpool lane on the highway yet. That's kind of where we are with public transportation. So we have a little ways to go. But, I think all in all, RIPTA, their buses are clean. They are generally reliable in terms of schedule. The frequency where they have heavily traveled, I mean, every 15 minutes, there's a bus going by Town Hall, either to Newport or to Providence. And generally, I'd say, right now there's restrictions on ridership, but in the morning, there are 5 or 6 people at each bus stop waiting for the bus on their way into Providence. I think as you see Newport grow, and then with Newark and Raytheon, there are people that our demographic is changing in town with the tourist and mill complex and the new apartments behind there, that you're also seeing people living there that would commute into Newport rather than drive. And we hope that that will continue. But again, it's the linchpin is going to be is the public transportation piece there.
I agree. Peter, have you seen, so with COVID, a lot of businesses and the way we do business has changed. Now, as a manufacturer, you need people to come in to your building, and what you produce is, I'm sure, in high demand right now.
No, we're
with the home workouts. Could you tell us how you're addressing that and with how this is impacting?
Just finding labor is at that end of the spectrum is very difficult. But then similarly, where there's no way we can do what we do here in Providence or anywhere within close to Kennedy Plaza, obviously. So the conundrum of manufacturing is that it's usually in the regional areas and provincial areas, you could say, and not in the cities like Providence or closer, just for obvious reasons. We've got 55,000 square feet of manufacturing space here, 80,000 square foot of warehouse just down the road, and 27,000 square foot of offices for the support staff. So it's to try and find that is difficult. And you don't want it there either. You don't want, without many trucks trundling down the drive just behind me here every day. It's you just don't want that in a built up area. We're quite lucky in these areas that ease of access of 195 is fantastic. As you get further down into Bristol, it becomes a little bit more limited. But where we are in Warren, it's one of the great benefits. One of the reasons, for the TPI building, which moves bus bodies, they make fiberglass bus bodies for electric buses. So that's their product there. Coming out 7 or 8 a week and trundling just up to the highway and off to North Carolina or wherever they're doing the final assembly. My dream is one day to do the assembly here so we can drive them out of here rather than take them out in a flatbed. But no, it's been important to support that program. It opens up, as Bob says, the carpooling is a big issue. Probably I didn't realize it until the onset of the pandemic, and when you start realizing that that's where that, not so much here in the factory, but there was this risk of transmission in these cars as people were bundling in 5 or 6 to a car and trundling across. And what, as Bob said about, and a lot of this thing, even about owning their own cars. I mean, one of the things we found, Bob, went about this van system that we tried to promote, but people where they're going to in some of the suburbs of Providence, you don't have parking. You don't even have a place to park this minibus. They're quite large things. So the public transport is a good solution. Obviously less convenient than other things, but we've got a good, with the restrictions, Bob, I know it's we've got a good half dozen people who are commuting on the bus in the morning and away in the evening, maybe more. there have been those limitations with the bus usage with the pandemic. I don't know whether they've lightened yet, but hopefully they do, because we're promoting it. Actually, we subsidise we pay for the Eco Pass for people and charge them a notional amount just to keep them honest. And it works well. I think people revere it as another perk, another benefit of working here. Should someone fall sick and the carpool driver or the car owner, there is no excuse. They can get up if you know it's going to happen, or they're on vacation. Get up and use the bus, and people have been doing that as an alternative, which is good. It's great to promote. You know, I'd like to see the usage increase, and one of the reasons why we do promote it financially, I see it as financially rewarding for us to be able to promote that. And as Ashley says, it's not just for my workforce here at Water, but also for the workforce and the properties I own down this same corridor. So it's key to be able to get workers to the workplace.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. And I saw, Avi mentioned in the chat, this area, the roads are already narrow. There's always so much traffic that I think the busing, if we could really get more consistent busing, it would take a lot of those people who would rather take the bus to work instead of driving, because the congestion is, I know I try to avoid Metacom when I can, just because of how much traffic there is. The one thing that I think is also important to kind of talk about, and one of the challenges that we've seen is it's the chicken or the egg, right? Like, in order for you to get people to ride a bus, the bus has to be consistent. But then on the expense side for RIPTA, they need so many riders to justify that bus. And so that was one of the things that I know Warren really had to try to push out ahead of time. And the businesses had to really work together with the town to ask their employees to take the bus and the community to take the bus, because RIPTA can't afford to continue that bus service without having people actually pay for it.
Users. Yeah.
Bob, I know you were really working to kind of push that out, and what were some of the barriers or challenges?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the first barrier is, again, the time that they've got the buses running. As Peter said, the morning bus was just a deadhead bus that was going back empty. So, initially there are some restrictions on how far RIPTA can go out of Rhode Island and then come back in. But getting that far down the 195 corridor is within those limits. They'll never make money on that route the way they have it set up now for timing. It's just not going to happen. And they know that, but it's really trying to engage them on, that route becomes much more functional if you connect that route to Newport, because it gives then the opportunity for people that are coming either from Warren, Bristol, or even from southeastern Massachusetts to take the bus with predictability all the way into Newport. And then I think it starts to pay for itself, but you've got to run more than 2 buses a day. A bus route that starts and stops at a remote park and ride in Tiverton, which is not even near the casino. So you're not even picking up that potential traffic. It's just never, I mean, that's a recipe for failure. And so, more of the chicken and the egg is, as we're talking about new development, I've been trying to engage Rhode Island Department of Transportation early into, here's what we're thinking about in terms of development. We want you to think about taking a 4-lane road and making it a 3-lane road. We think traffic moves better. There's been numerous studies that show that traffic, functions better at 25 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour than it does 35 or 40, just in terms of stopping and frequency. And but having better dedicated turning lanes. Again, this is heavily traveled as this road is. It runs from the Mass border into Rhode Island as a 2-lane road. It becomes a 4-lane road. And then when it gets to Bristol, it's a 3-lane road. And then it goes down to a 2-lane road again with that same volume of traffic. So, I mean, there is a solution. I mean, the solution already exists. You just have to go half a mile across the line, the Bristol line, to see that. But, again, I mean, now COVID is an excuse for everyone not to talk about these kinds of things because they have other problems. But we've continued to talk about it. It's probably safe I can say in this group that I'm a huge proponent of regionalism. You know, the idea that we're 39 separate municipalities and we don't talk to each other is, you know, from a government perspective, is ludicrous. I mean, transportation is one of the biggest regional issues that we possibly have. And again, that regionalism as it relates to transportation goes outside of town borders and even state borders, because, you know, there are a great deal of people in southeastern Mass that, you know, are commuting to Aquidneck Island. And, you know, I honestly, you know, as Aquidneck Island is trying to, Newport's developing their innovation hub center, whatever they do with bridge realignment, they're competing with the I-195 development as well. And, you know, if I have a choice of being able to get into Providence in 15 minutes or spend an hour and 15 minutes to go on Aquidneck Island, you know, that's not much of a choice. I mean, I'm going to go someplace else. And I really think that, you know, having a regional transportation system that expands on what's already working should sound logical, but apparently it doesn't to everyone.
I see in the chat, Allison Archambault, would you be willing to, could I take you off mute and tell us a little bit about the RI Mobility Innovation Working Group? Because it sounds like it really comes into the conversation and how we can, you know, learn more about that.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking me off mute. I've really enjoyed the conversations today. I was able to tune in for a little bit, and I think there are so many on the call that have really excellent ideas and a path forward. So my background, I represent the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management from our Office of Air Resources, where I work on a lot of transportation and air quality issues. So recently, the governor's office formed the Mobility Innovation Working Group, and it's an ongoing development to develop a comprehensive strategy to address transportation-related emissions. So the goal of the working group will be to produce a strategy and a portfolio of clean transportation policies, regulations, and initiatives to be implemented statewide by January 2021. And they just had their second public meeting this morning. I'm not sure when the next one is. October 1st is the next public meeting. So I encourage those to participate in that and have your voice heard, and we can form a better Rhode Island together.
Thank you, Alison. And that is such a good point. And I know living in the East Bay, and particularly Warren, it's something that Bob talks about on a daily basis, is climate change and how Warren, as much as I've always wanted waterfront property, this is not the way I really want to get it. But where we're located, it puts us in a very vulnerable area, as well as other areas throughout the East Bay. And so one of the things with transportation and looking at economic development and how housing and different things play into that, Bob's really been looking at that Metacom corridor of ways to address climate related barriers for the future. Bob, do you want to talk a little bit about that and how transportation is going to be key to playing into that?
Yeah, interestingly enough, every one of our evacuation routes in town is a state road susceptible to flooding. And, you know, again, for those people that don't have their own transportation, then public transportation becomes important. But because we're a small town and I wear several different hats, and we're only 11 square miles, I think, in size, and half of that is water. You know, our average elevation is 7 feet in town. So sea level rise and resiliency is something that we spend a lot of time worrying about and planning for. So 2 years ago, we had a demonstration project with the University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture, and walking around town with some of the students, The area adjacent to Market Street off of Belcher's Cove has a high percentage of absentee landlords, multifamily, that is smack dab in the floodplain. I mean, those properties are going to be flooded in the future. And that got me thinking about, okay, you know, this is in resiliency, this is an area we retreat from, but, you know, where do we retreat to? And, you know, the people that live in these homes are valuable to our community and our economy. And so I started the conversation with the state DOA, Department of Administration, the Coastal Institute at URI, and some other municipalities, Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank, you know, about how a buyout program for housing would work. And we're still in those discussions, but then I looked at Metacom and saw how underutilized that was in terms of development opportunities, and it was limited just because of the existing zoning that we have. And started the conversation with the town council about, you know, what it could happen there, and, you know, if we increase the density, and not crazy increase the density, but moderately increase it. And, you know, our initial build out analysis was that we could, you know, create almost an additional 10 million square feet of space. If we, you know, just looked at the amount of housing that we could create at 1,500 square feet on average, we could create almost 300 housing units. And so mixed income housing or workforce housing is something that we're very focused on. You know, so would there be the opportunity to move people from flood prone areas, relocate them to this area? You know, I've introduced the concept to our town council of using tax increment financing. So the increased taxes we would get by a developer getting additional density, we could reinvest that in infrastructure or a fund to buy some of these homes out. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife approach to how we do things, but, you know, kind of that's how we have to do things. But again, you're talking about, you know, where these people live now, they do have access to public transportation. So we have to make sure they still have it, but we also see the demographic of the tourist or mill, which are either empty nesters that are here seasonally, but there's a lot of young professionals that are taking public transportation. So, you know, we think that the ability to create new housing opportunities, you know, the charm of what Warren is and the uniqueness of it will continue to attract people that aren't car dependent. And so, I mean, that's kind of our global master plan for how this is going to come together. But clearly, you know, having that public transportation component is critical to this being successful.
Absolutely. It's really creating that live, work, play, and without being able to easily get around. People want to live in an easily accessible area, whether it's transportation via bus, walking, you know, or new technologies that come out. I think being able to walk to work or bike to work and different things, you know, some of the earlier conversations just about the innovative ways that people are coming up with to address this just really plays into, and I think Warren is just such a good example of even such a small town as in Rhode Island can be really challenging to get around. And so the current bus is a mile away from a lot of the jobs, and having to really think outside the box and figure it out, because it's so important for the growth of our economy here in Rhode Island and each individual municipality. But I think we're a few minutes, we still have a few minutes to go, but is there anything that Bob or Peter want to add that would kind of bring more into the conversation? Or we can just go to Avi and see if anybody has questions.
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, Peter talked about TPI. TPI is a company that does, you know, high-tech carbon fiber. They, at one point, we thought we might lose them from Warren, that they had moved some of their manufacturing out to Iowa because the cost of doing business was much less out there. And I think what they learned is that the quality of the workforce was less too. So what they ended up doing is taking more space in the building they were in that Peter had purchased, and then also consolidating some of their staff from Fall River. So, I mean, there are people coming from Massachusetts that were working in that facility, but their general manager was telling us at a meeting that he was driving to work one day and saw a guy walking, 3 miles from TPI that he had just hired that came from the University of Michigan. And I mean, really kind of punctuated for him that, this guy didn't have a car and he had to rely on the bus. And so he took the bus to the closest spot he could get, but he still had to walk 3 miles.
Yeah, and I mean, TPI, when we look at the future of Rhode Island and we talk about energy and they're actually contributing to this. So they are making buses that are
going someplace else.
Right. They're not staying here. They're getting shipped across the country to other places. And they also, part of their manufacturing, not here, but in other facilities, are the wind blades. And so, that whole supply chain of what we're looking to grow. And so we want to make sure that we're able to expand what they're doing and make it easy for them to bring more manufacturing to Rhode Island. I think Avi said, you were talking about Grow Smart earlier, and rethinking expanding sidewalks. Narrow sidewalks are an issue in Warren. Yes. Are there ideas for how to improve the situation to make the town more walkable?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, 2 years, I mean, our community is much more walkable than people realize. I think it's a New England thing too. People feel like they have to drive everywhere. I had gotten a grant through through Commerce actually, 2 years ago for what we call our arts, cultural, and historic walking trail. I mean, and basically, we're going to do some improvements at the East Bay Bike Path by Dell's Lemonade, more signage to let people know how close they are to certain things, and then also try to connect that to where Tourister is, and to guide people through the historic sections of town, take them down to the waterfront. We have a river walk that was part of the Tourister project. The town has acquired the former National Grid property as you come over the bridge from Barrington. We're going to extend the river walk as part of that project to the bridge. But the fact that that's less than a mile from town hall to that location, most people don't realize that. And I always use the example to people that, like, well, I can't walk that far. And I'll ask them, I said, have you been to New York City? Yes, I've been to New York City. I said, did you walk from Times Square to Central Park? Oh, of course, yeah, we did that. I said, well, that's basically walking from Warren to Bristol. The perception in people's minds is that, well, you can't walk that far. I mean, part of it, what we have to do is, and in our downtown area, I mean, there's still some gaps that we have to fill in. Our Water Street area is thriving. Main Street still has some gaps in it. So there's a perception, I think, for people that, it's not safe, particularly at night. And then you get to Metacom. I mean, there's just no physical relationship between what the architecture on Metacom, with the exception of Peter's buildings, and what's there. It was just never planned out right. It's been studied for 20 years, so it's paralysis by analysis. And I'm not a very patient person, so I mean, we're really trying to drive this revitalization. But the fact that somebody actually could walk from Metacom to Main Street, it's not a stretch, but there's no sense of connection right now between those, and we need to improve that.
Yes.
I've got the bike path extension project as well, Bob, that you're doing, linking Main Street to the schools and out to I live in Warren as well, out in the Twisted area overlooking Mount Hope Bay. So that is a link, a corridor.
Yeah, I mean, we have what we call the Broken Bridge project. We're working with DOT on the Safe Roads to School program, which are federally funded. We're installing one of the first carbon fiber bridges to connect our bike path, the Warren bike path, with the East Bay bike path. And it runs behind both the middle school and elementary school, but it's going to open up a whole new opportunity for people to experience other parts of Warren, but people that live in the eastern part of the town to have a different way to come into town. And, you know, if that got them to a revitalized Metacom corridor, that's great. If we can then, you know, we've looked at, you know, having better bike paths on Metacom to connect people over to the East Bay bike path. Potentially, again, that's something we could use some of the TIF funds for. That's not taxpayer money, it's money, but for the fact that we increased density, we wouldn't have seen.
And I know I'm excited about that's the bike path I run on, but then I dead end at the river there. So it'd be nice to be able to keep continuing on instead of
They're
just
trying to encourage triathlon, so we wanted you to run to a point and then swim.
right. Exactly. I mean,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, part of the Park Miller and a local gym here, 426 Fitness, and we've been helping the recreational department wants to put an outdoor fitness centre up adjacent to the school there, which would be accessible through that bike path link, which over the carbon fibre bridge you talked to. So there's a lot of different connectivity issues in getting away from just this hopping in the car and driving and parking in a massive car park somewhere. There's a lot of, you know, speaking from a resident's point of view, there's a lot of initiatives. And don't ever get patient, Bob, because we don't want you to get patient, because a lot of these things will come off. You're the driving force, the best advocate for us. And, you know, I think that's a nice thing with the local government and manufacturers, as we are business people, although a resident as well, that the town here, and even the governor has said it in talks that she's done here, punches above its weight in terms of that connection between businesses and the local government. That's very important. And reflecting on what you say about TPIs coming and staying here, when I bought the building, which was for our expansion, it was 250,000 square feet. It's a massive building, and it hadn't seen a lick of paint in 25 years, I assume, maybe 50 years, which is its vintage. But we cleaned it up, and thankfully we were able to convince them to stay, which brought those Massachusetts jobs over the river into Warren, and also we put a 18,000 square footers grade A office in there as well. So that now it's a centre for excellence. So it's gone from being a plant that the management, based in Arizona, said was the only plant they weren't allowed to bring customers to. It was that bad. But now they built it. They put $11-12 million into the project. Last week, if you drove down 136, you saw a massive crane teetering a 100,000 pound piece of press in through a hole that we cut in the roof. So that's all good news. And, you know, they're on the grow. So, and a lot of it, that them coming and the turning them to wanting to stay here, a lot of it was you, Bob, and the town in general being positive towards all these initiatives. So you don't feel as much as an outlier when you see that the town's behind that. And I think, you know, to say that there's a lot of bad press about manufacturing, we're not smokestack manufacturers anymore. We're job, wealth, and skill creators, really. And we've been able to grow here and thrive here, as Ashley says. We've never been busier. Never been busier. You know, pandemic driven, yes, but, you know, a lot of it's innovation and such. But, you know, all our fitness end of it, our commercial fitness end has dried up because the gyms are closing or aren't open or restricted openings or whatever. But home fitness has boomed. But, you know, we're lucky to be here and to be in this position. You know, hope to thrive and grow even more in town here. And again, with partnership of the local government and the state government as well. I think I've said before that one of the great things about Rhode Island, because it is small and insular and you've got that half a degree of separation, that you kind of know everyone, don't you? I mean, how many things that we've been on, Ashley, that crosses over between different departments, and, you know, Department of Labour and Training stuff, the transport stuff, you kind of know the same old faces. And it's really encouraging to see the alignment that you have. The alignment that comes between the different tiers of government and the manufacturers and businesses. It's very encouraging.
it is. It's true. We should record you saying that, Peter, of great ways why more manufacturing should be here in Rhode Island and why startups should start here. I know Toonie and I had the exact same conversation with Hillary Fagan from Rhode Island Commerce this morning, talking about how we're almost like a concierge service. So you can't get that in any other state. You know, there's just so many people that are willing to help, and we can just hand you, you know, you could start at the top and we can help that business and that entrepreneur really get off the ground. And I think that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's a confidence of businesses which are going to put the capital into as we put the capital in the TPI, the capital into our developments here on Metacom. And it's hard to do when you don't have that confidence, when you do feel like a bit of an outlier. So no, it's great to be made welcome for all these years and being able to prosper and help grow the town and reform the town, reshape the town.
Absolutely.
I think to that point, and I mean, we're fortunate that, you know, we have access to our federal delegation. I mean, I've been at Waterower with Congressman Cicilline, with Senator Reid. You know,
White House.
Some states, I mean, you never see your elected officials, but our federal delegation has been very, very helpful to not just the town, but Hope and Maine. And, you know, they're going to be a large part of our conversation with respect to, you know, the transportation piece, because so that's a national initiative as well and a national need. But as Peter said, I mean, it's, you know, you need the director of labor and training, you pick up the phone, you call him, he comes to a meeting. That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Peter, so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys. Thanks for your efforts as well.